These are the different types of seals that came out of that, these axles. This one there was two of these came out of the front axle. They're a unit body type of thing. They're actually, this part of the seal here goes onto the spindle itself and seals on it. This part here goes into the brake drum and seals it. And it's actually a two-piece unit where the actual seal goes in on a lip on the inside of that. There's the seal inside of there. Now this one has weep holes in it for the oil to get into it and to lubricate that seal, I guess. And it says on it, besides patent pending and all that crap, it says on it air side. So this solid side of this one is the air side. Now this seal came out of the rear axle, and as you can see, it's a two-part seal. The other one's a two-part seal too, but it's just shielded more. But here is the regular lip of a seal, like the one you would normally put in an axle. And see, that's the normal single lip seal. It's got the spring inside there, and that would normally fit over the axle, and that would ride on a machined surface of the spindle rather. And then this part is the part that the seal actually rides on here inside of that, and then this piece presses on to the spindle itself. Now these ones came apart as we took the hubs off. You see they separated, and it's got a sharp edge here. If you're really careful, you can put these back together, and I've done it before. That you got to be, grease them up or something, lubricate them up so that you can, and then push that lip of the seal, the rubber lip of the seal, over the metal lip of that inner race, and it'll pop back on there. And then there's another lip on this outside of this seal that's also got a pop on there. You gotta be careful not to cut those, because that is a sharp metal edge on there. But you can put those back together and reuse them. See, that one popped together now, and it would be, and see how this outer part of this now spins. So the seal section is on this race right here, and this race has a rubber inside here which would seal tight against the spindle shaft. Now this one doesn't tell you what side goes out, and I looked to try to figure it out. Now that's the old seal. This is a new seal. I got these from Six Robles when I bought brake shoes and stuff for it. And you see it's almost the same as the one that came out of the axle. They're pretty similar. This one has a farther rolled edge more back in here to help retain that seal a little more, but otherwise they're pretty much the same thing. So trying to figure out which way these go. The other seals are totally closed in, and they say air side on them. Now my logic tells me that this side here should go in for two reasons. One, it would allow oil to get in here to help lubricate that seal as it spins around inside of that race. And two, second reason is if this side went out, then there could be a good chance of dirt and debris getting in here and packing into this groove, which would shorten the life of the seal up. If you put this side out, then it's protected from any dirt getting into the seal. There's only a real narrow space in there for it to get into, so you wouldn't get a lot of dirt, big rocks or anything like that in there to help wear that seal out. The only problem with that is this seal, where the rubber here, it's actually probably close to being as wide, but the metal, it kind of tapers this direction. And it's the same thing with this side. If this side goes out, see there's a little taper in here on this rubber seal where it goes over the spindle, the seat on the spindle, that would help it slide on there easier. But that's the only thing that makes me question whether my logic is correct or not. But I'm pretty sure I'd rather have this solid face out where it wouldn't build up a whole bunch of debris than this side, which would tend to pack with a lot of crap. And then this side would also, if it's in, will also let oil in there, which will help lubricate that seal and keep it cool. Now, in a normal wheel bearing, you would pack this bearing full of grease, pack it all the way in there, make sure that whole race gets filled up all around all of these bearings, pack all these cavities up, put grease inside of there, and put it all together, and that make sure that there's grease in there. This is oil hub. We don't have any grease in there, so what I'm doing to start with, it's going to have grease in it as soon as oil in it as soon as I put it together and pump oil in it. But just to make sure it has oil, it's lubricated, I've got this assembly lube, and I'll just put a thin bit of it all the way around here so it goes down in those bearings, and rub it around so they get coated real good, so that it's not a dry fit in there. It's not metal resting against metal. There's some lubrication on it. And this stuff is a nice sticky lubrication for assembling engines. I've been using it for quite a while. Now for the seal, I've always just dry fitted the seals, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a little bit of engine assembly lube down in this groove for this seal, so it starts out lubricated. It doesn't take very much. Just let that run down in there, and then turn the seal so it gets deposited in there pretty good. Now I've got this this stuff called fuel lube, and I'm gonna it's a greasy type of substance. We use it for it's used for fittings and stuff, fuel fittings and whatnot, as a sealant around them. It stays soft, but it'll help seal it'll help lubricate this this seal going in, but it also helps seal it up. And so I put it around the outside, and then I'm going to put this seal in here so this cavity side is down against the bearing, and just set it in there. Now I've got a set of seal drivers, but they don't have it. They have aluminum discs, various ones of different sizes to fit over the seals. So you can, and then there's an aluminum shaft that screws into them to drive them in. So you put uniform pressure all the way around the seal to drive it in. But I don't have one that'll fit this size of a seal. Another thing that I've used is I've taken a socket and found the right size socket that would fit over the seal, but just still fit inside of the machined out portion that the seal sits in, the seat. And then I'll take that socket and turn it and put a extension in from the front side of the socket, in from the side that would normally, the nut would normally go on, and then I'll use that to drive the seal in so that it's got a nice uniform pressure all the way around the seal, so there's no hard pressure points or anything that'll bend the seal. Now I don't have a socket big enough to do that with on this either, so the trusty old dowel again, old hammer handle or something would work, but you just take the dowel and just tap gently, and you just do it around the corners. And the problem, problem is that it rocks unless you have a nice uniform surface on there, can do it. So I'll take this dowel and lay it in here, crossed here, and try to get it started. And that worked real good. Get it started. And you just have to do a little bit at a time, go around because it will cock, and you want it to drive in there uniformly all the way around. When it cocks, and it's larger, of course, than the whole cross section. So that seal has been driven in there to where it seats the bearing. And I get a little bit on this corner to go, and it's alright, that seal is seated in there real good. It doesn't take a whole lot of pressure. The biggest problem with it is getting it to go down in there square. Now I'll take a rag that has some solvent on it and clean up all of the grease and stuff that's been pushed out of that seal when it was pushed in there. And well, now that drum is ready to go on the spindle, and to make sure that there's no grease or anything on any of the brake shoe surfaces of this drum where the brake shoe contact. I take this clean rag and wipe one more time on that spindle and make sure it's absolutely clean. Don't want any residual dust or debris or anything that might have accumulated left on there. I'll take a little bit of this fuel lube and just rub right around that seat of the seal, for the seal where it slides on there, just to make that slide over there easier. And I'll rub a little bit on the seal itself. Now I've put a clean rag in here in this hole in this drum just to make sure it was stayed clean on the trip over, and while it was sitting here, because no matter what, there's dirt around here, everything's dirty, so it can get dirt on it any place, and any little bit of dirt or sand can cause a big problem somewhere down the road. Now push that on as far as I can by hand. And you can't get it on all the way. That seal has got to be pressure fit on there. And we also need, so that's the first thing, is to get that pushed in there. I take this inner bearing or outer bearing, and we'll put a little bit of assembly lube on it again, so it's just not dry when we're putting it together here. Make sure it gets on all the bearings. I'll slide it in there. There it went. Okay. And the thrust washer goes on. And the nut goes on. This is soft steel these spindles are made out of, so these nuts and stuff are, it's easy to booger the threads up on there, and they're tough getting on. Got my 1/2 inch drive ratchet with a 1.5 inch socket in it. Cleaned it out. Okay, now the nut is up against the bearing. It's now pressing that hub, that drum, on to the seal seat. Now, That's as much as I can get with that ratchet. So I'll put this big breaker bar on there and tighten it right up. Make sure it's on there and seated on there, and spin it a little bit as it goes on. I don't know whether that does any good or not, because that seal is probably spinning inside of itself rather than turning on that spindle. But tighten it up. Now that also loads the bearings, but that's too much load on the bearing. So now it's on there tight. But by spinning the bearings, this is one of the reasons I lubed it up ahead of time. That's about on there, about as far as it's going to go on this one. No more on that. So now I'll go ahead and loosen that nut. Till that spins free on there, but there's no axial slop in the bearing, in the drum. I'll do it again. That grinding is just the drum on the brakes. I'm going to turn it up about a quarter of a turn backwards after getting it tight, so there's not too much preload on the bearings. And then this little keeper goes on there. It's got the little flat here that goes on the machined flat on the spindle, and the little ears just pop over the nut. And you got to get it seated all the way in there. For some reason it's not going. I may have to turn that nut a little bit just to get it. There it goes. Nope. Okay, it snapped into place. Again, I'm going to use a little bit of fuel lube on this plug to help lubricate it so it slides in there a little bit easier, and it helps with the life of the rubber so it doesn't deteriorate so fast. Okay, that's in there good. I'll take some fuel lube and put on this O-ring. And I put the O-ring around the cap. There's the cap in there. Okay, that's on there. Now I can fill that hub up with oil, with grease, and it's done. Okay, this is what I used to put the grease in that hub, and it's just a regular grease gun. It's one we got with a piece of equipment we bought, and I just filled it with 90 weight gear grease. It goes in there, pops on that zert, and you just start squeezing the grease in there. Pump it in just like pumping grease. It is oil, 90 weight. Now, as I showed you, that oil goes in through the passage drilled in the end of that spindle and comes out through a hole on the back side of that large main bearing, and then it works its way forward. Now, this trailer is sitting tilted so that the other side is down the hill anyway, and then having it up on a jack on this side up in the air. This hub is this outer part of the hub is higher than the inner portion, so we can get quite a bit of oil in here. I don't know whether you want it completely full or not anyway, but it's got to have some room for expansion. And here it comes. Alright, now it's up to the top of the filler hole, and so we'll take this plug and just pop it in there and stopper that up. So that one is all filled with oil. I take and roll this hub a little bit and get that oil distributed around so it gets all the way around on the bearings. Of course, we did have it pre-lubed anyway with assembly lube, so that's not a big deal, but it's still smooth, turning smooth now. And as the oil settles down, you can see the level comes up to the bottom of this filler hole, this check hole right here. This trailer I bought 5 years ago or so down in Washington, and had it built down there in November, and we towed it from Washington down through Oregon to the southern part of Oregon, and back up through California, and then back up through Washington again, and from Washington, from Sumas, Washington to Prince Rupert, British Columbia, which is about 1,000 miles, 900 and some miles from Sumas. And then in Oregon, I built a box on the trailer to weatherproof it, and we had it full of stuff all the way on the trip back up. We had it really loaded, and unloaded it here once we got home, and we've used it for the last 5 years to haul around my excavator and my bobcat, and we've hauled. Get about 4 or 5 yards of rock in it at a time from the pits. We've hauled 300 or 400 yards of rock, I suppose, and logs. We've hauled a bunch of logs in it, and it's had some rough use, and like I said, the brakes have been worn out for a while now, a little over a year. The first one went a couple of years ago, and I got shoes for it, and then figured out that the other parts in it were bad too, and it was less expensive just to buy the whole backing plates, the whole complete brake kit, than it was to try to piecemeal it together. But anyway, it is up in the mountains, steep mountain roads, using the brakes a lot, coming down with big heavy loads and gravel and stuff like that. So it's had a lot of use, and there's virtually no wear on these bearings. The brakes were wore out, but I expected that. But the only weak point in these oil-filled bearings that I can see is, for me, for being up here where it's rough, is every once in a while something will catch on this plug and it'll pop out, and then when it does, it's exposed to the atmosphere, and you can get muck and stuff like that in there. and then you can't find that plug because it's just impossible to find it, so I had to buy some extra plugs. But anyway, it's a good idea to keep some of these extra plugs around, several of them, because these have popped out. Reading on the internet, some of the guys have said that there's supposed to be a vent in these hubs, so because when this heats up, the air pressurizes in there and it can blow oil out through the seal in the back, cause the seals to fail. It's probably more prone to blow that plug out, and that may be why that plug got out of there. I don't know, it may have, but we go through roads where there's a lot of debris and stuff, and so it could have caught on something too. It's hard to say. But that's a weak point in it. And then these plastic covers on here, if you hit a rock or a log or something like that when you're driving through rough country, it'd be pretty easy to shear one of these off, to break it, crack it, shear it off. I think I've replaced one of these. I haven't had any problems with the seals leaking in the back on the drum. This one was leaking, and I thought it was a bad O-ring, but when we took it apart, it was loose on there. It was just finger tight on there, this cap, and so that's one of the reasons why it was leaking. So anyway, I've had these off. Well, the front ones, I didn't take them off. I took them off on one side to check the brakes. I was going to rebuild the brake on the one side because I knew it was bad, and then, like I said, when I got it apart, I realized it needed more pieces than just shoes. So I put it back together, and I've had a couple of these apart, and I've reused the same old seals, and it's just like I showed you a minute ago where the two-part seal came apart, and I put one of them back together and I put it back on there, and it worked just fine. I don't recommend doing that. If you can change the seals, you're better off with that. It's really easy to damage those when they come apart and you get a leak, but I didn't have a problem with it. There was no leakage of any kind on the back side of these axles into the brake compartment. That was not what caused the brakes to fail. The bearings are good on them. This one here, when I took it apart, like I said, this cover was only on finger tight, and that nut in there on the spindle for the bearing that retains the bearing, that was also only on finger tight. So this axle could have potentially been a problem here. It didn't have enough preload on that bearing, but there was no wear obvious on it at all. Everything went back together good. And so anyway, that's my take on these Dexter axles. They're like I said, the spindles are soft, and the threads are boogered up on them. They're rough, and they're right from the get-go. You don't have to do anything to them to make them rough. The front one, I had to take a socket and turn that nut off all the way from the start, all the way till I got it off, and that one never been off before. That happened on all of them. They're all rough. The threads are rough. You can see the nuts that held the backing plate on to the axle itself. They're looking at them. They're the soft nuts. They're cheap nuts. I changed replaced all of the lock washers on them because, again, they're soft lock washers, and they were all flattened out and spread out from the nuts being torqued down. And so the quality control on these may be not the best, but they seem to be working okay. I put a lot of rough miles on them, so I don't know of anybody, you get a lot of highway miles where you're going down the road at 60, 70 miles an hour. On the highway, that might be just as rough, but what I've been doing with them on the back roads and stuff is I don't put as many miles on it, but the miles I do put on them are pretty tough on them. So anyway, that's my take on these Dexter axles, the oil-filled hubs. They seem to work okay. Well, I'll get the other one together and get this thing back on the road.